Okay. Okay, let's get started. Is it working? Okay. So today we're going to, before we dive into the technology of computer forensics, today we will go over several concepts and procedures for computer forensics in general. We will go over rules of evidence. This is not working, right? It is? Okay. Rule of confidence, rule of evidence, chain of custody, and also several concepts specific to disk forensics. Then we will talk about hash functions, and we will have our first in-class exercise today. So the in-class exercise we're going to have today, you probably did something familiar before. You formatted the disk, something like that. So before doing that, I'm not going to talk about the concept related to that lab. So we're going to talk about those concepts next week. But before that, we're going to do the lab first. So like we discussed last week, computer forensics basically involves obtaining, analyzing all kinds of digital evidence, digital information. And forensic scientists want to use them as some kind of evidence in criminal cases and also civil and organization corporate cases. So that's why basically there are two types of computer investigations. The first type is the public investigation, which is the government agencies. They are responsible for the criminal investigations and prosecutions. So because it's public investigation, there are certain laws of search and protect the rights of all people, including the suspects. So in US, there are Fourth Amendment and other laws. So public investigators, they need to understand these laws, especially laws on computer-related crimes. So there are federal laws and other regulations at different levels. So the investigators, they need to understand the standard legal process to build a criminal case. Otherwise, the case will not be valid. They cannot present the evidence to the court. So, like we discussed before, there are all kinds of cyber crimes. If you are watching the show, the Netflix show, you can see there are all kinds of cyber crimes. They are different. They are using computers and networks as a tool to affiliate those crimes. And still, even though computer forensics have been there for like 20, 25 years, still we don't have complete laws in this area. And some laws, they are flawed, and there are all kinds of new cases, like Bitcoin has been there for almost 10 years. I think this is the 9th or 10th year of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has been used for all kinds of illegal transactions. But Bitcoin itself, there's nothing illegal about Bitcoin itself. But it's kind of like any other money. Even though some agencies, they do not claim Bitcoin as a currency, but to me, it has the properties of currency. So it's like all other currency, like US dollars or Europe so they are basically they're legal, but they can be used to do illegal stuff. But Bitcoin is harder to trace. It's harder to find the actual user behind it. Even though it's a public ledger, it's easier to actually trace each Bitcoin or the smallest Bitcoin unit, Sashito. Is that pronounced Sashito? So it's easy to trace the movement, but it's harder to find who is the actual actor behind of this movement. But if you are exchange Bitcoin with other currency like US dollars, that's why if you are using Coinbase or something to exchange Bitcoin, they ask you to upload your ID, everything. So at that step, they know who you are. But if you only use Bitcoin, you mine Bitcoin and only use Bitcoin, it's very hard to trace your true identity. So Bitcoin has been used in darknet, in all kinds of cybercrimes, and even in our lab, our own research, we have been studying how Bitcoin has been used by criminals to collect money for a crypto ransomware. The ransomware is basically malicious software that encrypt your hard disk and try to blackmail you, because they use public key infrastructure. As long as they encrypt your hard disks, it's almost impossible to recover without the key. And they use public key infrastructure, so this private key was in the hand of the criminals. So basically, if they don't give you the private key, there's no way for you to recover that. So even if you use the techniques you studied in this class, computer forensics or disk forensics, you cannot recover those data because they are encrypted. So we analyzed how much money, how much in Bitcoin the criminal collected, they blackmailed from that ransomware. So we published a paper last year. There was we concluded that for the ransomware, we studied with a crypto locker. So in a period of 3-4 months, the criminals, they collected more than 300,000 US dollar equivalent Bitcoin. But obviously that was 2 years ago. Right now, those Bitcoin are much, much more expensive in US dollars. So there are all kinds of cyber crimes try to use helped by computers. And also we mentioned about Silk Road last week. So you can buy illegal stuffs, even hire murderers on those kind of websites. So for investigators, if they want to bring this kind of investigation to an end, eventually they have to follow these legal steps. Basically, there are 3 steps. First, someone files a complaint, and a specialist will investigate the complaint. And if they collect evidence, they can build a case and prosecute the case. So this is very similar to traditional steps in other traditional crimes, because this is a public investigation. And to do so, there are several levels of law enforcement expertise. We briefly discussed this last week. There are level 1, the police officers or other law enforcement agent. They can acquire and seize some kind of a digital evidence, including laptops, hard disks. That is what for example, if you watch the show, you know that they captured the guy behind the Silk Road in a San Francisco coffee shop. So what they did is they tried to grab him in a very in several seconds before he could close the lid of his laptop, because they know as long as he closes the lid of his laptop will be encrypted. There's no way to extract that. So that is what they did there. So after they get this kind of a digital evidence, like I said, those digital evidence, in some cases they are encrypted, in some cases they are have been deleted, intentionally damaged. They can try to recover. So in this class, we mainly study for disk forensics. We try to recover the data that has been deleted. But if they are encrypted, depends on how they encrypt it. Sometimes it's almost, with current technology, it's almost impossible. If they use public key infrastructure, it's almost impossible to recover. So the second step, after those police officers, they get the hard disks and the laptops, they will give them to the detectives. And usually the detectives, they have some knowledge of computer forensics. And they can do some initial investigation. And in most cases, they will get help from some specialist. So FBI has a lot of this kind of specialist. If you attend our yearly information assurance symposium here at ASU, we always invite several agents from FBI, and they are special agents doing cybercrime analysis. So those are the people who actually are doing this kind of things. So in addition to public investigations, obviously there are private sector investigations. And this is where things are a little bit different. Because usually this kind of investigation, they deal with private computers to those companies, the company's private computers. So all the laptops in this classroom, technically they belong to ASU. They're not your personal laptop. So what do you do here? Actually, the data, everything, ASU has the rights to view the data. So this is not protected by the Fourth Amendment. So that's why sometimes you log in a private company computer like this, even though it's called a public computer in the university setting, but actually it's a private corporation computer. Sometimes you see a disclaimer like this. So even you use an ASU computer, you will see a disclaimer like this. But you never read it, I guess. So this is actually talking about your rights and the corporation's rights. And if something bad happens, the corporation, they have the full right to investigate the computers. And obviously, this kind of investigation are usually conducted in civil cases. But sometimes it will go to criminal cases, depends on the nature of the crime itself. So different from public investigations, usually those kind of private investigations, the business, the companies, they want to continue this kind of investigation with minimum interruption to their regular operation. So there are all kinds of corporate computer crimes, also like email harassment, falsification of data, all kinds of things. So, like I said, those two investigations are different, but sometimes the boundary is very blurry, especially right now with bring your own device to your working environment. A lot of people use their own personal computers in their work environment. They put their corporation's data in their personal computers. And those cases are complicated. There must be other laws to regulate those kind of things. So we're not going deeper to that. Like I said, I want to give you a brief introduction to the legal aspects of computer forensics, but we're mainly talking about the technology part of it. So the difference between public and private investigation, if we summarize that, public investigations, they search evidence to support criminal allegations, mainly criminal. But private investigations, they want to support the abuse of a computer, a company or corporate assets. And sometimes it could lead to criminal complaints. So in order to collect evidence, in order for those evidence to be valid, to be presented to court, we have to follow all kinds of several rules. Basically, there are several rules to follow. And at the federal level, there is a federal rules of evidence, which is a specification all the law enforcement agents, they have to follow. So there are basically 4 rules called authenticity, admissibility, completeness, and reliability. So we will go over these 4 rules to understand what they're saying. So authenticity basically means can we explicitly link files, data, to some specific individuals and events. So which means can we, if we acquire some kind of data, can we be sure this data is created by some individual after they log in the computer, or can the audit logs support there is a link between this data to that individual. And there could be also crypto-based authentication to verify the data itself has not been tampered. Admissible means there are regular legal rules which determine whether potential evidence can be considered by a court. And obviously, there are several laws to regulate this. And completeness means the evidence, they should tell a complete story of a particular case. So the prosecutors, they are supposed to give a complete story. They are not supposed to just give the evidence to support their claims. And accurate means the reliability of the computer process should be maintained. So what they are doing, they should be legal. They should be can be verified that what they are doing follow all the legal steps. And to record everything happened from acquisition to prosecution, there is a step called it is called a chain of custody. Basically, when you are given an original copy of media, you need to document everything. So all the officers who are dealing with this case, they have to document every step, like where the media was acquired, when the media was accessed by whom, and what has been done to it, and also who gave this media or evidence to another person. So this is to maintain the integrity of all the evidence and all the data. So this kind of a chain of custody has to be maintained all the way until it is closed or goes to the court. So here we talked about when a lot, when and where a lot. So how do you maintain this kind of time attributes? So usually at the disk level, we can develop a timeline of incidents using so-called MAC attributes. So there are basically three different attributes for time. M means the modified time. So when it records the time a file content was last time modified. And A, which is the accessed time, which is this time will be updated whenever a file has been read, or if it's a program, it's an executable, it will record the time the program last was executed. And also there are change time, which can keep track of the meta information about the file was changed. For example, in Linux, there are owners of this file, groups of the file, and also permissions. So all those meta information is changed. This changed time will be updated. So if you copy one file from one computer to another computer, you are simply copy this one. So you are not changing the content. So the modified time will not be updated, even if it has been moved to another computer. But the change time will be updated. So those kind of information can be used to develop a timeline of incident. Obviously, this is this depends on the operating system you are using. Windows use different time attributes from Linux, and also other Unix systems, they could use different time attributes. So that's why there is also a field in computer forensics is try to rebuild the timeline, and also try to create some narrative based on those timeline information. So I want to summarize the forensics process for computer forensics. Basically, it's very easy to remember. You just remember AAA. So the first step is called acquisition. It includes preparation and preservation. Basically, it means acquire the evidence and data without altering and damaging the original data or thing. So today, we are going to use several tools to acquire the disk, the content on a disk. And there are several tools we can use. And all those tools will not alter the data, but still they are going to save the data in different format. So we're going to discuss that later. The second step is called authentication or identification. Basically, authenticate the recovered evidence data is the same as the original data. So one way to verify that is using hash functions. So that's why we're going to cover how hash function works and what is a good and bad hash function later in this class. And the last step, after acquisition and authentication, the analysts, they can analyze the evidence. But of course, when they do so, they have to maintain the integrity of those data. They cannot modify it, they cannot tamper it. So the final step is just to report this, present this, and try to bring it to prosecution if it's a public investigation. So I already covered this part. So what kind of analysis we can do if we're doing disk forensics? Imagine you acquire a hard disk. What kind of analysis you can do? This is just one example for all kinds of forensics, because in this class, I'm going to cover something new like car forensics, memory forensics. It's obviously will be different. There are some additional information we can acquire, we can analyze from those kind of evidence. But for disk forensics, or you just acquire a computer, the first thing usually forensic scientists they want to do is they want to get some basic information about the computer. So what operating system this computer is running, what kind of service, the web service, DNS service, what kind of application layer service this computer is running, what other applications this user has installed there, the hardware specifications, and also they want to know the basic information about the file system. That is where they can start recover deleted files. Are there deleted files, hidden files, or other evidence could be hidden there, and what kind of permission was set in the system? Is there password files on the system? What is the network architecture of those computers or networked groups of computers? So usually they will have all kinds of issues. So those computers could be compromised by virus. Those hard disks could be intentionally formatted, could be intentionally damaged. And their job is try to recover as much as possible when those kind of situation are there. So reporting is basically documenting everything. So those are the 4 steps, AAA and the report. So basically, as a computer forensic scientist, their role is to gather evidence to prove a suspect committed a crime in a public investigation or violate a company's policy in a private setting. So because this is very serious stuff, obviously we need some systematic approach. There are procedures and checklists. So I already showed you there is a guidance on at a federal level. There is a federal rules of evidence, and also other agencies, including Department of Justice, they have been developing all kinds of procedures, protocols for the agents to follow. So we are not going to dive into them, but you need to know that this is very serious stuff because we are talking about criminals. So there are all kinds of models proposed in academia as well. So basically the system approach has those 4 steps like we said, and some other books they will say it has 6 steps, but basically they are the same thing. They just break some of the steps down even more. Initial assessment, planning, resource determination, evidence acquisition, authentication, risk management investigation, and report. So some books will use these 6 steps, and some books will use those 4 steps, but they are very similar stuff. So that's why I also want to introduce you to those 6 steps and give you some examples. But you can see they are very similar stuff. So the initial assessment basically is to systematically outline the case details. For example, a situation is an employee abuse case. So the nature of the case is side business conducted on the employer's computer. So for example, several years ago I heard that some professors use, not ASU, use their university's supercomputer to mine Bitcoin. Obviously, after they mine the Bitcoin, they will not donate the Bitcoin to the university. They will keep it. So basically, this is some case like this. They're doing some side business using the employer's computer, and in this case, the co-workers have complained that someone has been spending too much time on his own business and not performing his assigned tasks. So then type of evidence is a USB drive, and the operating system is a Windows XP, and the disk format, usually USB drives, they will use FAT. They will not use NTFS. One of the reasons is you want to use USB drives on different computers. That's why you use the USB drive. But a lot of computers, they may not read NTFS or Windows or other Windows disk format. And also, probably NTFS is not really efficient on USB drives. And the location of evidence is one USB drive was recovered from the employee's assigned computer. So the initial assessment will document something like this. The planning is should include how to collect the targeted evidence, prepare an evidence form, and establish the chain of custody form. So usually there will be several forms they should fill every time when the evidence was transferred to somewhere else, and also something happens to this evidence. Then how to transport the evidence to a computer forensics lab, and how to secure those evidence in an approved secure container. So the evidence custody form will help document everything like that. So usually there are basically several types of forms used in real world. There are forms that can document single evidence and also multiple evidence. I know this kind of stuff is not very technical, but they are very important too. So here is a real world example of the police officer used to document the chain of custody. So you can see that it's called a high-tech investigation unit where we use this form. And this form is used for this example for one piece of evidence. You can see there are case numbers, investigators, the initial investigators' names, nature of the case, location where the evidence was obtained, description of the evidence, and how the evidence has been processed. Each step has to be documented like this. And also, even companies, they have something similar for private investigations. This one is an example of a form for 10 pieces of evidence. So you can see there are multiple items, and still how each item has been processed must to be documented here. So the planning stage, usually computer crimes or computer forensics, this is also called high-tech investigations. They need to develop formal procedures and informal checklist to check all the issues important to high-tech investigation. For example, employee termination cases, they need to check the internet abuse and also email abuse. So in our email forensic class, we will see a lot of email abuse cases. And the resource determination stage, just gather resources identified in investigation plan, include software, hardware. Usually we need original storage media, of course the custody form, and the most important thing is for disk forensics, we need the so-called the bitstream imaging tools. So you probably have been using this kind of tools, but you never know they are named like the bitstream imaging tools. Tools like DD, data dump. I guess some of you have used the DD. Anyone use the DD before? No? Okay. So you are going to use it today. And Windows, they also FTK is a tool we are going to use to build the images for disks. So the most important part of authentication is to maintain the integrity of the evidence, to avoid damaging of the evidence, to preserve the original evidence. Basically, it means physically we need to place the evidence in a secure container. All those disks, they can be physically damaged, and sometimes they could be damaged by some advanced tools using electric magnetic field. So there are containers to prevent those evidence from being damaging in those cases. And also we need to complete the custody form, of course, and also we need to create forensic copies of the evidence. So for some kind of evidence, it's hard to create a forensic copies, but for disk forensics, we are talking about make a bitstream copy of the disk first. Whenever you get a hard disk, you make a bit-by-bit image of it. Then you analyze that image. You never analyze the original hard disk again because you don't want to damage that. Anytime you use it, there is a risk that you could damage it. So the investigation part, basically, for disk, these concepts are kind of tied with disk forensics. So in disk forensics investigation, we mainly want to extract data from all the files, including those intentionally deleted files and file fragments, and also, those complete files. So sometimes this can be very time-consuming. It's very difficult to do so. And when you do this, you have to follow the rule of evidence. So fortunately, there are tools available for us to do this, like the one we are going to use today is called FTK. They can help us automatically identify deleted files in the system, in the hard disk. So now we will start our disk forensics part. We will first talk about how can we acquire evidence from disk, some basic knowledge there. So there are several formats for digital evidence. The first one is called the raw format. Basically, it's a bit-by-bit copy of the original evidence. There is no metadata, or the metadata is maintained somewhere else. And different softwares, especially commercial softwares, obviously they have their own formats. And those formats, they include all kinds of meta information. And because they are commercial softwares, usually they do not read each other's format. And some scientists, they have proposed some some public format called advanced forensics format. But most commercial softwares, they support this, but they don't really want you to use this. But the raw format is probably the most important one, because basically it's a bitstream data from the disk to files. So the advantage is it's very fast. They don't really, the tool doesn't really analyze it. It just copies it bit by bit. And so there is no other computation. It's very fast. And it can ignore some minor errors. And most computer forensics tools can read the raw format. Actually, all the computer forensics tools, they can read raw format. And the disadvantage is the raw format is a bit-to-bit copy, which means it is as big as the original evidence. So if the original evidence is huge, then making copy of it, it also takes a lot of disk space. And another thing is there is no algorithm or something to try to correct the errors in those hard disks. So if there is an error in the hard disk, it will be read by those tools. But sometimes, like I said, for raw format, that is what we want. We want a faithful presentation of everything there. And obviously, commercial tools, they use their own format. So today, you are going to see FTK and also ProDiscover, they use their own format. So those formats, usually they will add metadata there, and also they will try to compress the acquired image, so make it smaller, and they can split those images into smaller segmented files, so it will be easier for them to move or copy. And also they will add all kinds of metadata there. Sometimes even they can try to use algorithms to correct the errors found in the hard disk. So obviously the disadvantage is it's hard to share an image between different tools. So that is what you are going to say in today's lab. And also, usually there is a file size limitation for each segmented volumes, but this is more like application specific. Each commercial tool, they have different limitations. And this AFF format is created by a researcher in a company. So the goal is to provide compressed and also uncompressed image files, and there is no size restriction to disk to image files, and he wanted to provide space, the image files or segmented files for metadata, and it was supposed to be an open source, open standard, which can be supported by all kinds of applications and operating systems. And it also can be extended to have some internal consistency checks for self-authentication. So usually, this format has the extension, file extension as a AFD or AFN. So this is another open standard. So there are several ways to acquire the disk data. So the first one is called a static acquisition. Second one is called live acquisition. Basically, static acquisition means you do not boot from this hard disk. You plug this hard disk into another computer, which has another main hard disk where your operating system is running. And so this hard disk, you are just simply reading from it. So it's static. And a live acquisition means you capture the image of the hard disk which you are running the operating system on. And there are different methods to acquire data from a hard disk. I want to introduce logical acquisition and sparse acquisition first. So this is a very important concept. Logical acquisition means we only want to capture some specific files of interest. You get a hard disk, you are only interested this user's password. You look for all the password files on the hard disk. That is called a logical acquisition. But usually, if you do something like this, you already have something in your mind. You know what you are looking for. You are probably at, this is probably for some specific analysis task. You already have an analysis task in mind, and you try to acquire the data you need. And another more comprehensive method is called sparse acquisition. So basically, they want to collect everything, including the deleted data on the hard disk. Everything from the hard disk, including deleted ones. but obviously this kind of method takes longer time, and for larger disks, it could be even harder. The other two types, the first one is called bitstream disk to image file. So basically, this is the method we usually use once we acquire any kind of hard disk. We want to make an image of that hard disk. And this is where you can use tools like FTK or DD. So basically, you do a bit-to-bit copy of it, but you copy everything into a file. When you acquire a hard disk, you make an image of that, and that image is a digital file. You can move that image from one computer to another computer. Another way is you can do a bitstream disk to disk copy. So basically, you acquire one hard disk, and you try to get another hard disk, and copy everything from the evidence hard disk to your new hard disk to make your new hard disk exactly the same like the original evidence. But this is not what we usually use. We usually, because it's much more convenient to do the first way, disk to image, it's much more convenient, and technically it should give you everything you need. So those are the concepts I already discussed. So there are several tools we can use to acquire disk images. And for example, in a Linux system, we have the fdisk command, which can at least create, delete, verify partitions in Linux. And there are also other tools to support FAT file system in Linux. And to acquire data, today we're going to use a tool called DD. Basically, it's just an application. Even though it's an application, you can imagine this. You took an operating system class before, I guess. So even though this is an application, it's going to copy bit by bit of your hard disk. So it has to talk with the operating system. So it will use system calls to talk with the operating system and try to read everything from the hard disk. So the DD command we're going to use today looks like this. There are several parameters. The first one is called IF. Basically, I is input. Input file, it means input file, because in Linux, they use a file descriptor to represent everything. It could be an actual digital file, it could be a hard disk, it could be even some virtual files. And the OF is the destination, and you can give the block size. There are several examples. For example, we can copy the content of one file bit to bit to another file. This is the first example. And the second one, you can see that we are copying everything from the hard disk to an image, to a file. And there's an MD5 checksum calculation to verify if the MD5 is correct. And also, we can DD another hard disk. And the SDA is usually it's not really hard disk. It's, what is that called? What is the new storage we are using?
Solid state.
Yeah, solid state. Yeah, solid state. Yeah. So basically, then you can split them to several files, and you can specify the size of it. But this is a bit-to-bit copy. You only get the raw data. You don't get any other metadata from it. So today, the tool we're going to use include DD and also FTK. So FTK is a commercial tool which is widely used by law enforcement agencies. And it comes with an imager too. It's called an FTK imager. It can acquire the image from the hard disk using the raw format or its own format. So before we move to the in-class exercise, I also want to talk a little bit about hash functions, because hash functions are widely used in this class just to verify the integrity of any evidence. Obviously, it has many other use cases. Any of you studied hash functions before in like information assurance or network security? Okay, so you know something about it. So even the foundation of Bitcoin is a technology called blockchain, and blockchain heavily utilize hash functions. There are many hash functions. There are good ones, there are bad ones. There are popular ones like MD5, SHA-1. To design a good hash function is really difficult. Usually only very good crypto scientists can do that. Cryptographers can do that. So today I will introduce you to some bad hash functions to get you a feeling what is a hash function. So basically, hash function is just a method of compressing strings. So when we say strings, we're not talking about plain English. We're just talking about bit strings. Everything can be presented in binary, right? So we're just talking about binary strings. So a hash function is a function that takes a bit string of arbitrary length and outputs something with fixed length. So the input is called the message, and the original message, and the output is called digest or hash value. So message of arbitrary length could be very long, could be the whole hard disk, could be one Word document, could be a long movie. You put that into this hash function, and it generates a fixed length output. And obviously, the length of the output is usually much shorter than the original bit stream. That's why it's called a digest. And the output, usually they have a fixed length. Popular ones are 128 bits or 160 bits. For example, MD5 has 128 bits output. SHA-1 has 160 bits. And SHA-2, they have several different choices you can choose. And the longest right now we have is 512 bits output. So it can take anything as input. For example, the website, usually they record your usernames, and you use a username and password to log in. But the websites, they don't really store your password, because if they store your password and the website is compromised, your password will be compromised. What they really store is the hash value of the password, because even if some attackers get the hash value of your password, they cannot use it. They cannot recover the password from the hash value. So, for example, in this case, the website, they will use MD5 to hash your 20 letters passwords, and also they can use MD5 to hash your PDF file. And this digest becomes a signature of this file. So if you want to compare two big files, two big PDF files, you can calculate the MD5 of it. So if the MD5 is different, it's very likely. If the MD5 is different, actually they are for sure to be different. Those two files, for sure they are different. And also, you can use a hash file to hash a huge hard disk. You can get the. So you can see that this function is a one-way function, because the input space is basically infinite, unlimited. You can put anything there. But the output space is relatively small, even though 128-bit is still huge. 512 bits, that is really, really a huge space. But still, compared to the input space, it's much, much smaller. So it's impossible to generate the original input from the output. It's basically impossible. This is very easy to understand. I give you a digest, which is 128 bits. There is no way you can recover the full hard disk from it, right? You don't even know the length of the original input. Even if I tell you the length of original input, there is no way you can recover it. So because this function maps elements in an infinite space to a relatively small space, it means that different elements in the input space, they could be mapped to the same element in the output space. And this is called the pigeonhole principle. This is a principle in the I don't know. Anyway, it's a math thing. We don't want to dive into that. So, which means that there are several properties a good hash function should have. The first one is a good hash function should be very easy to compute. Give you a very large file, a whole hard disk, it should only take very, very short time, milliseconds, to get the hash value of it. And also, it should be secure. Let's say we give you a hash value, and it should be mathematically infeasible to find the original, to find any original input that generate this hash value. We're not talking about the original input. Any input that can generate this hash value, it should be hard. This is called the pre-image resistant. And there's another property called the second pre-image resistant, which means give you the original message, give you an input message, it should be very, very hard, mathematically difficult for you to find another input that this input will have the same hash value as the original input, which means it's hard for you to get this kind of collusion. When two input have the same hash value, we call the collude. So it should be very hard. This property is important because I can give you an example for that. For example, like I said, the website where we just save the hash value of your password. So if I want to get into your account, one way is I steal your password. Another way is I find another string which can have the same hash value of your password. But it is supposed to be mathematically difficult to do so. That's why we are still trusting those websites. And the third one is called a strong collision resistance. Basically, it says it is computationally infeasible to find two input, and those two input have the same hash value. So in this case, we do not predefine any of them. We just say it's hard for anyone to find any two strings, and those two strings have the same hash value. Those are the properties a hash function should provide. But obviously, no hash function can provide the third one, because there is guaranteed there is collision. It's just very difficult for them to find. But if you search MD5 collision, you Google that, you will find that there are websites that show you real examples people have found in all these years. There are concrete examples of collisions there. So, like I said, design a very good hash function to have all those properties is very, very difficult. Even the hash function we are using right now, like the MD5 or SHA-1, it's also very difficult to prove those property holds mathematically. It's very difficult to prove that. The current status is more like it's hard for us to prove those hash functions are insecure. No one can prove they are insecure, but actually no one can prove them are secure. So that is where we are at. So I'm not a cryptographer. I don't know how to design good hash functions, but I know how to design a bad one. So I will give you one example and I show you this is really a hash function, but it's a bad hash function that we are now using in this class, and the websites are now using this function. So this hash function is very simple. It takes anything as input, and it will just calculate a mod 8, which means the output will only be 1, 0 to 7. So it will be a 3-bit output. Any input, it will generate 3 bits output. So this is a hash function. So let's say if this hash function can provide the first property, pre-image resistance, which means given a hash value, it is hard to find any input that can generate this hash value. Obviously, it doesn't hold. For example, we gave you a hash value 7, and we know that if we input 7, 15, or 23, it will generate this hash value. So if the first property doesn't hold, all the second one and third properties, they do not hold either. This is a very good example for bad hash functions. So the hash function we really use is much more complicated. Like MD5 was designed by the Turing Award winner Ron Rivers. He's a cryptographer. He designed RSA and also MD5 and several other crypto algorithms. So next, we are going to have our first in-class exercise today. The TAs should have bring the class topics today. So there are 24 laptops in this classroom. We're going to use those laptops, and we have 12 more for those who do not have access to those laptops.